the day I signed for the mansion, my hands did not shake because of the cost. They shook because I knew my parents would appear the moment the ink dried. They stand at my gate now, smiling as if this victory belongs to them. They did not come to celebrate. They came to take what they believe is theirs. However, I have prepared 3 things inside an empty chair: a voice recorder and a sealed envelope. My name is Stella Green, and for the first 18 years of my life, I was a ghost haunting a ranch-style house in the suburbs of Chicago. I do not mean that in a metaphorical, poetic sense. I mean it with the cold, hard precision of a safety audit. If you walked into my parents' living room back then, you would see a large, professionally framed photograph hanging above the fireplace. It was taken during a summer vacation to Lake Geneva when I was 12, and my brother, Brett, was 10. In the center of the frame, the sun is shining, the water is a brilliant, impossible blue, and my parents, Gordon and Diane Green, are smiling that tight, practiced smile of people who have achieved the American dream. Between them stands Brett, beaming, with my father's hand resting proudly on his shoulder. If you looked very closely at the left edge of the frame, you would see an elbow. It was a knobby, sunburned elbow attached to a girl in a yellow swimsuit. That was me. That was all of me. I remember the day my mother hung that picture. I stood there, holding a dust rag, staring at the severed limb that represented my entire existence in the family unit. I asked her why she had chosen the one photo where I was cut out. Diane did not even turn around from adjusting the tilt of the frame. She simply said that the composition was better this way. She told me that sometimes you have to trim the edges to make the center look perfect. It was just decoration, she said. I was 12 years old, but I understood the subtext perfectly. I was the clutter that needed to be cropped so the masterpiece could shine. That feeling of being an accessory to someone else's life never really left me. It followed me to family gatherings, specifically the annual barbecue my Aunt Linda hosted. I was 16 the last time I went. I remember standing by the cooler, fishing for a soda. When a distant cousin from the East Coast approached my father, he slapped Gordon on the back and asked about the family. My father launched into a 5-minute monologue about Brett's baseball stats, Brett's grades, and how Brett was almost certainly going to get a scholarship. The cousin nodded, impressed, and then gestured toward me. He asked if I was a friend of Brett's from school. My father looked at me. For a split second, there was a vacancy in his eyes, as if he had to search his hard drive to recall who I was. Then he gave a dismissive wave of his hand and said that I was just with them. He did not say, "This is my daughter." He did not say, "This is Stella." He said I was just with them, as if I were a piece of carry-on luggage or a stray dog that had followed them into the car. I was simply breathing furniture. I took up space. I consumed oxygen. But I served no functional purpose in the grand narrative of the Green family legacy. Brett was the protagonist. I was the background extra who did not even get a line in the credits. I left home 3 months after my 18th birthday. There was no dramatic fight. There were no tears or slammed doors. That would have required passion. And my parents reserved all their passion for their golden boy. I packed my 2 suitcases while they were watching a game show in the den. I walked past the television, stood in the doorway for a full minute waiting for them to acknowledge me, and when they didn't, I walked out. I think my mother might have asked me to close the screen door on my way out, so the bugs wouldn't get in. That was her final piece of maternal advice to me. Keep the pests out. I moved north to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, chasing cheaper rent and the anonymity of a city where no one knew I was the girl cropped out of the picture. I built myself from the ground up, layer by layer, like pouring concrete. I did not have a college fund. That had gone to Brett's future DUI legal fees and his first 2 attempts at a business degree. I worked double shifts at a diner, took night classes, and slept 4 hours a night for 6 years. I taught myself how to be invisible in a way that was useful, rather than painful. That is how I ended up at Blackridge Infrastructure Solutions. My job title is Safety and Compliance Specialist. It sounds dry, and frankly, it is. I spend my days reading regulations, walking through construction sites with a clipboard, and measuring tolerances. I check for cracks in the foundation, I ensure that the bolts are tightened to the correct torque. I verify that the safety nets are actually strong enough to catch a falling body. It suits me. My entire life had been built on a shaky foundation, so I found a strange comfort in ensuring that bridges and highways were structurally sound. I became obsessed with rules because rules were the only things that had never lied to me. Gravity does not play favorites. Tensile strength does not care if your father loves you. If you calculate the load correctly, the structure holds. If you don't, it collapses. It is fair. I am 34 years old now, and I have become very good at surviving. I have a 401k. I have a decent car with all-wheel drive for the brutal Wisconsin winters. And, miracle of miracles, I have Evan Klein. Evan is everything I am not. He is charismatic, loud, and fills a room just by walking into it. He works in project management at Blackridge, one floor above me. He has that easy, rolling confidence of a man who has never had to wonder if he belongs in the room. He has dark hair that is always perfectly styled and a smile that makes you feel like you are the only person in the world who understands the joke. When we started dating 8 months ago, I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. I kept waiting for him to realize I was just background noise. But he didn't. He asked me about my day. He listened when I talked about the difference between tensile and yield strength. He invited me to dinner with his friends and introduced me as his girlfriend, his hand resting on the small of my back, solid and claiming. For the first time in 34 years, I felt like I was in the center of the frame. We were sitting at a bistro in the 3rd Ward last Tuesday, watching the snow fall outside the window. It was only November, but in Milwaukee, winter is not a season. It is a permanent resident that occasionally goes on vacation. Evan reached across the table and took my hand. His thumb traced the knuckles of my fingers, and he looked at me with that intense, focused gaze that made my knees weak. He told me that he thought we made a great team. He said that with his ambition and my attention to detail, we could run the company one day. I believed him. I wanted to believe him so badly that I ignored the tiny, nagging voice in the back of my head that sounded suspiciously like my own intuition. I wanted a family. I wanted to belong. That desire for permanence is what drove me to my current obsession. I am buying a house, not a condo, not an apartment, but a house, a real house with a yard and a deed and a front door that I can lock against the world. I have been saving 50% of my paycheck for a decade. I drive a car that is 7 years old. I bring my lunch to work every single day. I do not buy clothes unless something wears out. I have amassed a down payment that would make a loan officer weep with joy. I found the listing 2 weeks ago. It is a historic property near the lake, far too big for one person, but the price was suspiciously low because it needs significant structural repairs. Most people see a money pit. I see a project. I see bones that are strong but neglected. I see something that can be fixed if you just pay attention to it. I haven't told my parents. I haven't spoken to Gordon or Diane in 3 years. The last time we spoke, they called to ask if I could loan Brett $2,000 because he had some bad luck with an investment. They didn't ask how I was. They didn't ask about my job. They just assumed that since I had no husband and no children, I must have disposable income that should rightfully be redistributed to the son who actually mattered. I said no. They hung up. But as I sit here at my desk at Blackridge, staring at the purchase agreement for the house, a cold shiver runs down my spine that has nothing to do with the office air conditioning. I am about to sign my name to a piece of paper that proves I exist. I am about to own something substantial, and that terrifies me. It terrifies me because I know how my parents operate. They have a radar for success. They can smell it like sharks smell blood in the water. As long as I am the struggling, invisible daughter, I am safe from them. I am of no use. So I am left alone. But if I become something, if I have a mansion, if I have a life that looks better than the one they built for Brett, I look at the signature line, Stella Green. It looks lonely on the page. Evan walked past my cubicle 10 minutes ago. He winked at me and dropped a coffee on my desk. He whispered that he has a surprise for me later, something about the new highway project he wants to bring me in on. He says it will be good for my career. He says we are going to celebrate. I smiled back. but my smile felt tight. I possess a deep, primal fear that the universe balances the ledger in cruel ways. I feel like I'm standing on the edge of a cliff, looking at a beautiful sunset, unaware that the ground beneath my feet is made of chalk. I have everything I ever wanted right in front of me. I have the job, the money for the house, and the man. I pick up the pen. The ink is black, permanent. I do not need Gordon and Diane to love me. I made peace with that the day I watched them eating popcorn while I walked out of their lives with 2 suitcases. I do not need their approval. I do not need their pride. I have survived 34 years without it. I just need them to stay away. I need them to remain in their perfect suburban bubble with their perfect sun and their perfect photos. I just need them not to show up exactly when I'm about to start living. But as I sign the last letter of my name, the pen scratches against the paper, a harsh, grating sound in the quiet office. It sounds like a warning. The collapse of my life began with a single invoice number on a Tuesday afternoon. It was not a scream or a crash, but a quiet discrepancy in a spreadsheet that refused to balance. I was reviewing the procurement logs for the Interstate 94 expansion project. It was a massive contract for Blackridge, the kind that kept the stock price healthy and the executives in new Lexuses. My job was to ensure that what the engineers designed was exactly what the construction crews built. I traced a shipment of tension bolts intended for the support pillars. The engineering specs called for grade 8 hardened steel, capable of withstanding massive vibrational loads and temperature fluctuations. The invoice, however, listed a shipment of grade 5 bolts. Grade 5 is fine for a riding lawnmower. It is catastrophic for a highway overpass in a state where the temperature swings from 90 degrees in July to 30 degrees below zero in January. The difference in cost was roughly $40,000. The difference in safety was the potential for a structural failure within 5 years. I assumed it was a clerical error. I was naive. I highlighted the line item, pulled the original purchase order, and walked down the hall to the project manager's office. Evan was on the phone, leaning back in his chair, laughing at something the person on the other end had said. When he saw me, he held up a finger, finished his call with a smooth goodbye, and smiled. He asked me if I was ready for dinner later. He said he was craving Italian. I put the file on his desk. I pointed to the highlighted row. I told him we had a problem with the supplier for the 94 build. I explained that they had shipped the wrong grade and we needed to halt the installation scheduled for Thursday until we could swap them out. Evan looked at the paper. He did not frown. He did not look concerned. He looked bored. He slid the paper back toward me. He told me that it was already handled. He said the supplier was just using a different SKU code for the billing system, but the physical product was correct. He told me I was overthinking it. I told him I had checked the lot numbers. The lot numbers corresponded to the lower grade. This was not a billing error. This was a material substitution. Evan stopped smiling. He stood up and walked around his desk, closing the door. He lowered his voice. He told me that we were 3 weeks behind schedule. He said that the penalties for late completion were severe. He told me that the safety margins were over-engineered anyway, and that nobody would notice the difference because the concrete would cover it all up in 48 hours. I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. He knew. I told him that I could not sign off on it. My signature was the final gate. If I signed that compliance form, and that bridge cracked in 2 years, I would be the one going to prison. Evan sighed. He put his hands on my shoulders. He used that soft, persuasive voice that I had fallen in love with. He told me to trust him. He said that Marla Voss, the chief operating officer, was watching this project personally. He said if we caused a delay over a minor technicality, it would look like incompetence. He told me to just let it go for the sake of our future. I removed his hands from my shoulders. I went back to my desk. I sat there for an hour, shaking. Then I did what I was trained to do. I wrote a formal non-compliance report. I attached the invoice, the spec sheet, and the photos of the lot numbers I had taken in the yard. I submitted it to the central server, copying the vice president of engineering and the external audit team. I thought I was protecting the company. I thought I was protecting the drivers who would use that bridge. The next day, the silence was deafening. Evan did not come by my desk. He did not answer my texts. When I saw him in the break room, he turned around and walked out before I could speak. The installation on Thursday was paused, but nobody came to thank me. The atmosphere on the floor was heavy, like the air before a tornado touches down. 3 days later, I stayed late to finish reviewing the documentation for a different site. It was 7 in the evening. The office was mostly dark. Save for the emergency lights and the glow from the cubicles, I needed a signature from the executive wing to close out a file, so I took the elevator up to the 12th floor. The executive floor was silent. The carpet was thicker up there. My heels made no sound. The main conference room had glass walls. It was often used for board meetings and client presentations. The blinds were usually drawn. But tonight, they were open just a crack. A single lamp was on inside. I saw Marla Voss first. She was sitting on the edge of the mahogany table, her back to the door. She was unmistakable, the sharp bob cut, the tailored suit that cost more than my car. Standing between her knees, with his hands resting familiarly on her waist, was Evan. They were not discussing blueprints. They were laughing. Evan leaned in and kissed her neck, and Marla threw her head back. It was not a tentative, new romance. It was the comfortable, arrogant intimacy of two people who had been doing this for a long time. I stood frozen in the hallway. My brain tried to process the image. Evan, who held my hand at dinner. Evan, who told me we were a team. Evan, who had told me to ignore the safety violation because Marla was watching. He wasn't protecting the project. He was protecting his mistress. He was protecting his ticket to the C-suite. I backed away. I did not confront them. I did not take a picture. I felt dirty, nauseous, and incredibly small. I took the elevator down, got in my car, and drove home in a daze. I did not sleep. The summons came at 9 the next morning. An email from Human Resources. Subject: urgent personnel matter. Location: room 4B. I assumed it was about the bridge report. I thought they were finally going to address the fraud I had uncovered. I walked in with my head high, clutching my notebook with all my documentation. The HR director, a man named Paul whose hands were always slightly damp, was there. So was the company's internal legal counsel. Evan was not there. Marla was not there. Paul did not ask me to sit down. He pushed a folder across the table. He told me that a formal complaint had been filed against me. I asked if it was about the bolts. The lawyer looked at me with flat, dead eyes. He said it had nothing to do with operations. He said I was being accused of creating a hostile work environment, targeted harassment of a senior executive, and emotional instability that posed a risk to company security. My mouth fell open. I asked what he was talking about. He opened the folder. Inside were printouts of dozens of emails. I looked at the top one. It was sent from my work account. The timestamp was 2 weeks ago. It was addressed to Evan. I know you are trying to leave me. If you do, I will burn your reputation to the ground. I watch you in the parking lot. I know who you talk to. You belong to me. I read the next one. It was addressed to Marla Voss. Stop looking at him. I see the way you look at him in meetings. I will make you regret it. I am the only one who knows what is really going on here. I looked up at Paul. My hands were trembling. I told him I never wrote these. I told him this was insane. The lawyer pointed to the metadata. He said they were sent from my IP address. He said the linguistic patterns matched my other correspondence. He noted that I used specific phrases like, as per my analysis, and reference point, even in these threats. It was a masterclass in framing. Whoever wrote these knew my voice. They knew how I structured my sentences. They had taken my professional diligence and twisted it into the rantings of an obsessed stalker, and I knew exactly who had done it. Evan. He had access to my unlocked laptop whenever I went to the bathroom during our late-night work sessions. He knew my passwords. He knew my syntax. I tried to defend myself. I told them about the bridge. I told them about the bolts. I told them this was retaliation for the compliance report. Paul shook his head. He said that my report had been reviewed and found to be baseless, a paranoid delusion created to justify my erratic behavior. He said the supplier had confirmed the correct shipment. They had covered their tracks. They had likely swapped the paperwork or paid someone off. Then came the final blow. Paul told me that given the severity of the threats against a C-level executive, Blackridge was terminating my employment immediately for cause. There would be no severance. There would be no COBRA insurance coverage because of the gross misconduct clause. He asked for my badge. He asked for my phone. 2 security guards escorted me to my desk. They gave me a cardboard box. They stood over me while I packed my framed degree and my cactus. Everyone on the floor watched. People I had worked with for 5 years looked down at their keyboards. No one made eye contact. I was radioactive. They walked me to the front door. The receptionist buzzed me out. The heavy glass door clicked shut behind me. I stood on the sidewalk. It was raining. I had no job. I had a mortgage application processing for a mansion I could no longer afford. My reputation was in ashes in this industry. Gross misconduct is a death sentence. It is a small world. HR directors talk. I was soft-blocked. No reputable engineering firm would touch me. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was my personal cell. The only thing I had left. It was a text from my mother. I stared at the screen. I had not told them. I had not spoken to them. But bad news travels faster than light in the suburbs. Maybe Evan had told them. Maybe a neighbor heard it from a cousin who worked in the building. The message was short. We heard about what happened. God. Stella, please do not drag the family into your circus. We have a reputation to maintain. I dropped the phone into my purse. I did not cry. The shock was too absolute for tears. I felt a strange, hollow sensation in my chest, as if my heart had been surgically removed and replaced with a block of ice. I walked to my car. I sat in the driver's seat and looked at my hands. They were the same hands that had signed the purchase agreement for the house just days ago. Now, they belonged to nobody. I was not just unemployed. I was not just single. I had been systematically dismantled. Evan had not just broken my heart. He had stolen my voice, used it to write his own narrative, and then destroyed the original. I started the car. The engine turned over with a reliable hum. It was the only thing in my world that still worked the way it was supposed to. I drove away from the glass tower of Blackridge, watching it shrink in my rearview mirror until it was gone. I thought I had hit the bottom. I was wrong. The fall had only just begun. The fall from a corner office to a basement studio apartment next to the train tracks takes exactly 4 days. That is how long it takes for a credit check to bounce, for a landlord to demand 3 months of rent up front because of an employment gap, and for dignity to dissolve into survival. My new reality was a 300-square-foot box that smelled permanently of boiled cabbage and damp drywall. The building sat so close to the commuter rail line that every 45 minutes, the entire structure would shudder. My toothbrush would rattle in the glass on the sink. The cheap laminate flooring would vibrate against my bare feet. It was a rhythmic reminder that the world was moving forward, rushing toward important destinations. While I was stuck in the stagnant pause between stations, I was no longer Stella Green, the safety and compliance specialist. I was Stella, the independent contractor for 3 different delivery apps. I was Stella, the woman who stocked shelves at a pharmacy on the graveyard shift. I traded my tailored blazers for a generic windbreaker and my ergonomic office chair for the cracked leather seat of my car. But soon, even the car became a luxury I had to ration. Gas prices were climbing, ticking up 10 cents every few days. My savings account was a flat line. To keep the car running for deliveries, which was my primary source of quick cash, I stopped driving it for anything else. If I wasn't getting paid to move, I walked. It was mid-January in Wisconsin, the kind of winter that doesn't just make you shiver. It hates you. The wind comes off the lake like a physical blow, stripping the heat from your body in seconds. It was a gray, wet, relentless cold that settled into the marrow of your bones and refused to leave. I finished a shift at the pharmacy at 6 in the morning and slept until 2 in the afternoon. By 4. The sun was already giving up, sinking behind the gray horizon. I needed groceries. The cheap supermarket was a mile and a half away. I wrapped myself in layers, a thermal shirt from my old life, a wool sweater that had a hole in the elbow, and my coat. It was a high-performance parka, waterproof, windproof, rated for 30 degrees below zero. It was one of the last expensive things I owned, a relic from the days when I could drop $400 on outerwear without checking my bank balance. I pulled the hood up, locked the flimsy door of my apartment, and started walking. The sidewalk was a treacherous landscape of brown slush and black ice. I walked with my head down, counting my steps, calculating my budget in my head. I had $18 to last me 3 days. That meant pasta, maybe a bag of frozen vegetables, and oatmeal. No meat, no cheese, definitely no wine. I walked to punish myself. That is the truth I didn't want to admit. I had the gas to drive a mile, but I felt I deserved the cold. I deserved the sting of the wind on my cheeks, because I had been stupid enough to trust a man who viewed me as collateral damage. I had been arrogant enough to think I could buy a mansion. The cold was my penance. I reached the shopping center plaza just as the streetlights flickered on. The parking lot was full of SUVs left running to keep the heaters on, puffing white clouds of exhaust into the air. That was when I saw her. There was a metal bench bolted to the concrete near the cart return corral. It was the worst place to sit. It was exposed to the wind tunnels created by the parked cars, and it was directly under a flickering halogen light that buzzed like an angry hornet. A figure was huddled on the far end of the bench. At first, I thought it was a pile of discarded trash bags. Then I saw the trembling. It was a small, rhythmic shaking, so violent that it seemed to be vibrating the bench itself. As I got closer, I saw a woman. She was old, her face a map of deep lines and paper-thin skin. She was wearing a thin wool coat that might have been sufficient for an October breeze but was suicide in January. Her hands were bare, clutched tightly in her lap, the knuckles turning a terrifying shade of blue-white. Most people walked past her. They looked at their phones. They looked at their cars. They looked anywhere but at the freezing human being in their peripheral vision. I understood why. To look is to acknowledge, and to acknowledge is to feel obligated. When you are drowning, you don't want to hand someone else a life vest. I walked past her. I took 5 steps toward the automatic doors of the supermarket. Then I stopped. My safety training kicked in. It was a reflex I couldn't kill. Identify the hazard. Mitigate the risk. The hazard was hypothermia. The risk was death. I turned around. I told myself I was an idiot. I told myself I couldn't afford to be a Samaritan. But my feet moved on their own, crunching through the frozen crust of snow back toward the bench. I stood in front of her. She didn't look up. Her eyes were fixed on a grease stain on the concrete. "Ma'am," I said. My voice was raspy from the cold. She lifted her head slowly. Her eyes were startlingly clear. They weren't the clouded, confused eyes of someone struggling with addiction or dementia. They were sharp, gray, and completely lucid. "I am fine," she said. Her voice was calm, almost conversational, but her teeth were chattering so hard the words were chopped into staccato syllables. "Just resting." "You are freezing," I said. It wasn't a question. It was a fact. "The bus," she whispered. "Missed it." I looked at her hands again. They were skeletal. If she stayed here another 20 minutes, she would have frostbite. I sighed. It was a heavy, defeated exhale that turned into a cloud of steam. I unzipped my parka. The cold hit me instantly. It felt like someone had thrown a bucket of ice water over my chest. I shivered, my muscles contracting in shock. I pulled the coat off, leaving me in just my sweater and thermal shirt. The wind cut right through the wool like it wasn't even there. "Here," I said, holding the coat out to her. She looked at the coat, then at me. "You will be cold." "I am young," I said, my teeth already starting to chatter. "You take it, put it on." I didn't wait for her permission. I draped the heavy, down-filled coat over her shoulders. I watched her pull it tight, burying her face in the fur-lined collar. The violent shaking of her body began to subside almost immediately. "I am going inside," I said, hugging my own arms. "I will be right back." I ran into the supermarket. The heat of the store hit me. and my skin prickled painfully as the blood rushed back to the surface. I moved fast. I grabbed the oatmeal. I grabbed the pasta. I skipped the frozen vegetables. I went to the deli counter. I bought a cup of hot soup chicken noodle, the expensive kind from the hot bar. Then I went to the coffee kiosk and bought a large black coffee. It cost me $4.50. That was 25% of my remaining budget. I paid with trembling fingers, counting out the crumpled bills and loose change. The cashier looked at me with pity. She thought I was buying it for myself. I walked back outside. The wind was waiting for me. I forced myself back to the bench. The woman Ruth. She had said her name was Ruth was still there. She looked like a small child drowning in my oversized parka. I sat down next to her. The metal bench burned the backs of my thighs through my jeans. "Drink this," I said, handing her the coffee. "And eat this." I opened the soup lid. She took the cup with both hands, letting the warmth seep into her frozen palms. She took a sip, then another. She didn't thank me profusely. She didn't cry. She just drank the coffee with a quiet, efficient dignity. We sat there for 5 minutes. I was freezing. My lips were numb. But I couldn't leave her alone until I was sure she was stable. "You look tired," she said. She wasn't looking at me. She was watching the cars leave the lot. "I work nights?" I lied. It wasn't really a lie. "Long week." "Why did you give me your coat?" she asked. She turned to look at me then. Her gaze was intense, analytical. It felt like she was scanning a barcode on my forehead. "Because you were cold," I said. "You don't have much," she observed. She gestured to my worn boots, the grocery bag with only 2 items in it. "I can see it. You are counting pennies." I felt a flash of irritation. I didn't want to be analyzed. I wanted to go home and eat my pasta. "I am getting by." "You are still kind when you have nothing," Ruth said. Her voice was steady now, the coffee having done its work. "That is rare. Most people let their misery make them cruel." I let out a short, harsh laugh. It sounded brittle in the frozen air. I stood up, hugging my chest, desperate to get moving again. "Kindness doesn't pay the rent, Ruth," I said, "and it definitely doesn't buy heating oil." She looked at me for a long moment. There was something in her expression I couldn't place. It wasn't gratitude, it was recognition. "Keep the coat," I said. "I have another one." That was a lie. I had a denim jacket and a fleece hoodie. I was going to freeze on the walk home. But I couldn't ask for it back. I couldn't strip the warmth from her just to save myself. "Thank you, Stella," she said. I froze. I hadn't told her my name. Then I remembered. My old work ID was still clipped to the inside pocket of the parka. I had forgotten to take it out. She must have seen it when she put the coat on. "Stay warm, Ruth," I said. I turned and walked away. I walked fast, my head down against the wind. The cold was agonizing now. It bit into my skin, turning my fingers stiff and clumsy. I had 1.5 miles to walk without a coat. I would probably get sick. I would probably lose a shift because of the fever. I didn't look back. I didn't see Ruth watching me go. I didn't see her pull a sleek, modern smartphone from the deep pocket of my old parka, a phone that looked entirely out of place in the hands of a homeless woman. I didn't see her dial a number and speak 3 words into the receiver. I just walked into the dark, thinking about how I had just lost my favorite coat, unaware that I had just passed the most important interview of my life. The winter dragged on, relentless and gray, but my world had contracted to a singular, strange point of gravity, the metal bench outside the supermarket. I did not plan to go back. After that first night, after I walked away freezing in my denim jacket, I told myself that was it. I had done my good deed. I had sacrificed my warmth for a stranger, and the transaction was complete. But 3 nights later, I found myself walking that same route. I had an extra pair of wool socks that I had found at the bottom of my duffel bag, men's socks, thick and gray, that I had bought for my father years ago and never gave him. I also had half a turkey sandwich from the gas station that was about to expire. I told myself I was just checking to see if she was still alive. She was there. She was wearing my parka. The hood pulled up like a cowl. When she saw me, She didn't smile, but she shifted to the side, making room on the freezing metal. It was a silent invitation. I sat down. I handed her the socks and the sandwich. She took them with a nod, tucking the socks into her deep pockets and unwrapping the sandwich with slow, deliberate movements. That became our ritual. Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday nights, I would finish my shift, walk the mile to the plaza, and we would sit. It was the only time in my week when I didn't feel like a failure. To the rest of the world, I was the disgraced safety officer who got fired for being crazy. To my landlord, I was a late payment waiting to happen. But to Ruth, I was just Stella. I was the person who brought hot tea in a thermos. Ruth was an enigma. She ate like she was starving, but she spoke like she was presiding over a courtroom. She never talked about how she ended up on the street. She never told me about children or ex-husbands or bad luck. Instead, she asked me questions. And they weren't the polite questions of a friend. They were the surgical questions of a prosecutor. One night, the wind had died down, leaving a heavy, damp stillness in the air. I was venting about the unfairness of it all. I was complaining about how Evan had twisted my words, how Marla had looked at me with that smug pity. Ruth stopped chewing her sandwich. She wiped her mouth with a napkin I had brought. "Stop," she said. Her voice was sharp. "You are wallowing. Wallowing is for people who have time to waste. You are broke. You do not have time." I blinked, stung. "I am not wallowing. I am explaining why my life is over." "Your life is not over. It is just messy," Ruth said. She turned her body toward me. "Tell me about the paperwork, not the feelings. The paper. Who signed the original procurement order for the bolts?" "I did," I said. "Well, I signed the request. Evan signed the approval." "And the change order?" Ruth asked. "When the supplier switched the grade of the steel, there had to be a change order or a variance request. Who signed that?" "There wasn't one," I said. "That is the point. They just swapped it." "Impossible," Ruth said. She shook her head. "In a company the size of Blackridge, the accounting software won't release payment unless the SKU matches the purchase order. If they paid the invoice, someone had to override the system manually." "Who has override authority?" I stared at her. "Department heads, VP level and above." "So Marla?" Ruth said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, Marla." "And the internal audit," Ruth continued, her eyes narrowing. "Did they flag the discrepancy in the quarterly reconciliation?" "I don't know," I said. "I was fired before the quarter ended." "They would have to bury it in general overhead or miscellaneous materials," Ruth muttered, almost to herself. "That is the only place to hide $40,000 without triggering a flag. It is lazy, but it works if the CFO is golfing on Fridays." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "How do you know that?" I asked. "How do you know about override authorities and reconciliation flags?" Ruth paused. For a second, her eyes darted away. Then she shrugged, pulling my parka tighter around her. "I used to clean offices," she said. "You hear things when you are emptying the trash. You read things left on desks. People think cleaners are invisible. They leave their whole lives out on the table." It was a plausible lie, but it didn't sit right. The vocabulary was too precise. She didn't say bosses. She said department heads. She didn't say check the books. She said reconciliation. "You ask questions like a lawyer," I said. "I have had a lot of time to think about what went wrong in the world," she said dismissively. "Now, listen to me. Do you have copies?" "Copies of what?" "The emails, the report you wrote, the photos of the bolts." "They took my laptop," I said. "They wiped my access." Ruth sighed, a sound of deep disappointment. "Stella, never trust the company device. Tell me you have hard copies." "I have a few photos on my personal phone," I said. "And I think I emailed the draft of the report to my personal account the night before I submitted it, just to work on it at home." "Good," Ruth said. She leaned in, her intensity frightening. "Do not delete them. Do not organize them. Do not open them, just keep them, and start writing everything down. Every interaction, every date, every time Evan looked at you sideways. Memory fades. Ink does not. What is the point? I asked, feeling the exhaustion settle back in. I can't sue them. I can't even get a lawyer to call me back. You are not building a lawsuit yet, Ruth said. You are building a shield. Right now, you are naked. You need armor. I listened to her. I went back to my freezing apartment and I started to dig. I found the draft in my sent folder. I found the photos of the lot numbers. I printed them out at the public library. Paying 10 cents a page, I bought a cheap 3-ring binder. Ruth taught me how to organize it. She told me to request my full employment file from my previous jobs, the ones before Blackridge. Prove you were sane before you met them, she told me the next Tuesday. Get letters of recommendation from your old bosses. Get your tax returns showing steady income. Build a paper trail of a rational, competent woman. When they call you crazy, you throw 10 years of sanity in their face. I did as she asked. I tracked down my old supervisor from the diner I worked at in my 20s. I got a character reference from the landlord of my old apartment. I felt like I was reconstructing Stella Green from the ashes. It gave me something to do other than deliver food and stare at the ceiling. It was strange. I was taking career advice from a woman who slept on a bench. And yet, it was the best advice I had ever received. She became my anchor. I started looking forward to our meetings. I bought her a better pair of gloves. I brought her a thermos of hot chocolate. Then came the night that changed the texture of our relationship. It was late February. The snow was melting into a dirty slush. We were sitting on the bench, and I was showing Ruth the binder. I had organized it chronologically, just as she suggested. Suddenly, a sound came from inside my parka, the one Ruth was wearing. It was a soft, digital trill. I froze. I knew that ringtone. It wasn't the default ringtone of a burner phone. It was the subtle, professional chime of a high-end device. Ruth didn't panic. She didn't scramble. She simply reached into the inside pocket, pulled out a phone, and answered it. She didn't say, "Hello." She didn't say, "Who is this?" She brought the phone to her ear and said, "Report." Her voice changed. It wasn't the raspy voice of the woman on the bench. It was deeper, colder. It commanded immediate attention. I sat there, staring at her, my mouth slightly open. She listened for a long minute, her eyes fixed on the distant traffic light. Her expression hardened. "No," she said. "Absolutely not. That asset is frozen for a reason. Tell the board that if they move a single cent before the audit is complete, I will have their heads on a platter. Do not let them touch that file." She hung up. She slipped the phone back into the pocket as if nothing had happened. She turned to me. I was staring at her. "Who was that?" I whispered. Ruth looked at me. For a moment, I thought she was going to lie. I thought she was going to say it was a wrong number or a caseworker, but she didn't. She smiled. A small, dry smile that didn't reach her eyes. "An old ghost," she said. "Ghosts don't have boards of directors." I said, "Ruth, who are you?" "You know too much. You have a phone that costs $1,000. "It is an old phone," she said, "and I know too much because I pay attention." "You just gave an order," I insisted. "You sounded like a CEO." Ruth laughed. It was a rusty sound. "There are many kings in this world. Stella, some sit in towers, and some sit on benches. But I will tell you this. I know what it looks like when a structure is rotting from the inside. I spent my life building things that were supposed to last, and nothing makes me angrier than seeing people chip away at the foundation for a quick buck." She leaned closer to me. Her gray eyes locked onto mine. "You are a good builder, Stella. You care about the bolts. Most people only care about the ribbon-cutting ceremony. That makes you dangerous to people like Evan. Never forget that." She deflected my questions with compliments, and I starved for validation. Let her do it. I let the mystery slide because I needed the affirmation more than I needed the truth. I didn't press her on who she was calling. I didn't ask why a woman with that kind of authority was sleeping in the cold. I assumed she was eccentric. Maybe she was a former executive who had a breakdown. Maybe she was hiding from someone. We were both broken women hiding in the dark. That was enough for me. I stood up to leave. "Same time Thursday?" I asked. "Thursday," she confirmed. "Bring more of that soup. The broth was good." I walked away, clutching my binder to my chest. I felt stronger than I had in months. I felt like I had a plan. I didn't look back. If I had, I might have seen Ruth take the phone out again. I might have seen her typing a message. Her thumbs moving with lightning speed. Subject is showing resilience. Documentation is solid. Proceed to phase 2. I didn't know I was a subject. I didn't know I was being graded. I just thought I had made a friend. But in Ruth's world, friendship was a luxury. Competence was the only currency that mattered, and I was slowly, unknowingly, passing the test. The notification on my phone screen was innocent enough. It was a standard delivery request for a rush courier job. The payout was $22, plus a potential tip for expedited service. In my current financial state, $22 was not just money, it was 3 days of food. It was a quarter of the electric bill. It was survival. I accepted the job before my brain actually processed the address. 500 West Main Street, Suite 1200. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the cancel button. The address was burned into my memory like a scar. It was the headquarters of Blackridge Infrastructure Solutions. It was the building where I had spent 5 years of my life ensuring that steel beams did not buckle and concrete did not crack. It was the place where I had thought I was building a career, only to have it dismantled in a single afternoon. I sat in my car, the engine idling, wasting precious gas. I could cancel. The app would penalize me, maybe suspend me for 24 hours, but I would save my dignity. Then I looked at the fuel gauge. It was hovering just above the empty line. I looked at the passenger seat where a stack of overdue notices sat in a messy pile. Dignity was a luxury for people who had checking accounts. I put the car in gear and drove toward the glass tower that dominated the city skyline. I told myself it would be fine. It was 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. The lobby would be quiet. I would walk in, drop the package at the reception desk, and walk out. I would be a ghost. I was wearing my delivery uniform, a generic blue windbreaker with the app's logo on the back, and a baseball cap pulled low over my eyes. I looked like a service worker. In a building like Blackridge, service workers are not people. They are moving parts of the background. They are less visible than the potted plants. I parked around the corner to avoid the valet zone. I grabbed the heavy envelope, which felt like legal documents, and walked toward the revolving doors. The lobby smelled exactly as I remembered. It was a mix of polished marble, expensive espresso, and that distinct ozone scent of recycled air conditioning that screams corporate power. The heels of my boots squeaked slightly on the terrazzo floor. I kept my head down, focusing entirely on the reception desk 20 feet away. The receptionist was new. I did not recognize her. That was a small mercy. She was young, bored, and typing on her phone behind the high marble counter. I slid the envelope across the surface. I muttered that it was a rush delivery for the legal department. She didn't even look up at me. She just pointed to a digital pad for me to sign. I scribbled an illegible line, turned around, and prepared to sprint for the exit. I was 10 feet from the door. I was almost free. Then the elevator bank on the far wall chimed. It was a cheerful, confident sound. The door slid open with a soft whoosh. I heard the laugh before I saw the face. It was a laugh I used to love. A laugh that used to make me feel safe. Now, it sounded like the grinding of metal gears. Evan walked out of the elevator. He was flanked by Marla Voss and 2 junior associates I recognized from the accounting department. They looked like a promotional photo for corporate success. Evan was wearing a charcoal suit that was tailored to perfection. His tie a bold crimson. He held a takeaway cup from the expensive coffee shop in the lobby like it was a scepter. Marla was beside him, radiant in cream silk, projecting an air of untouchable authority. I froze. My instinct was to run, but my legs locked up. It was the fight-or-flight response short-circuiting into paralysis. I tried to shrink. I tried to become two-dimensional. I turned my shoulder, angling my body away from them, hoping my cap would shield my face. But Evan had the eyes of a predator. He didn't just see the lobby, he scanned it for opportunities. And he saw me. He stopped mid-sentence. The silence that followed was instant and heavy. The junior associate stopped too, looking confused. Stella. His voice wasn't a whisper. It was a projection. It echoed off the marble walls, sharp and clear. I didn't turn around. I took a step toward the door. "Oh my God, it is Stella!" Evan shouted. He sounded delighted, but it was a cruel, performative delight. He took 3 long strides and cut off my path to the exit. I was forced to stop. I looked up. There he was, the man who had framed me, standing 2 feet away, smelling of sandalwood and betrayal. He looked me up and down. His eyes lingered on the cheap blue windbreaker, the delivery bag slung over my shoulder, the scuffed boots. A slow smirk spread across his face. "Wow," he said, exhaling the word like a puff of smoke. "I heard you were struggling, but I didn't know it was this bad." The lobby was not empty. There were people waiting for meetings. Security guards, employees returning from lunch. At the sound of his voice, heads turned. The ambient noise of the room dropped away, replaced by the acute, prickly silence of a public spectacle. "Let me pass, Evan," I said. My voice was low, shaking slightly. Marla glided up beside him. She looked at me with a facial expression that was a masterpiece of fake sympathy. Her brows knitted together in a concern that didn't reach her cold, shark-like eyes. "Stella," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "it is interesting to see you. We were just talking about the old team." "I am just doing a job," I said, gripping the strap of my bag. "I need to leave." "A job," Evan repeated, chuckling. He turned to the junior associates, who were watching with wide eyes. "You guys remember Stella, right? She used to run safety. Now she is running errands." One of the associates stifled a nervous giggle. The other pulled out his phone. I saw the camera lens point at me. "Leave me alone," I said. I felt the heat rising in my cheeks, a burning mix of shame and rage. "We are just trying to be friendly," Marla said, placing a hand on Evan's arm as if to restrain him, but her grip was loose. "You know, Stella, we really did try to help you before you left. It is a shame you were so resistant to professional guidance." She was rewriting history in real time, in front of an audience. She was cementing the narrative that I was the problem, the unstable element that had to be removed. "You framed me," I said. It came out louder than I intended. "You both know what you did." Evan's smile vanished, replaced by a look of aggressive pity. He shook his head slowly. "See, there it is, the paranoia. It is sad. Really." He took a step closer, invading my personal space. He lowered his voice, but it was still loud enough for the onlookers to hear. "You need to move on. Stella, stop blaming us for your breakdown. Look at you. You are a mess." I looked around. The receptionist was watching. The security guard, a man I used to say good morning to for 5 years, was looking at his shoes. No one was going to help me. I was the crazy woman in the delivery uniform, and they were the executives in the suits. In this building, the suit always wins. "I am leaving," I said again, stepping to the side. Evan moved to block me again. He wasn't done. He was enjoying this too much. He wanted to make sure I stayed down. He wanted to crush any tiny spark of resilience I had left. "You know," he said, his tone conversational, "I actually bumped into your brother, Brett, last week." My blood ran cold. "Great guy," Evan continued. "We grabbed a drink. He told me about how worried your parents are. He said Gordon and Diane are heartbroken." "Don't," I warned. "Don't talk about them. They are embarrassed." "Stella," Evan said, driving the knife in. "That is what Brett said. He said your parents feel like they don't even have a daughter anymore. They told him that they tried to raise you right, but some people are just broken." He leaned in, his face inches from mine. "Imagine that. Even your own mother and father won't claim you. They are ashamed of you. If your own blood doesn't want you, who do you think ever will? The words hit me like physical blows. It wasn't just an insult. It was a precision strike at the very foundation of my trauma. He was confirming the nightmare that had started when I was 12 years old, staring at the family photo where I was cut out of the frame. He was telling me that I was right to feel invisible. He was telling me that my deletion from the world was unanimous. I stood there, paralyzed. I couldn't breathe. The air in the lobby felt thin, insufficient. I saw the phones recording. I knew this would be on social media within the hour. Crazy ex-employee confronts boss. Delivery girl meltdown. I wanted to scream. I wanted to punch him. But mostly, I just wanted to disappear. I wanted to dissolve into the floor and cease to exist. Marla checked her watch. Come on, Evan. We have a board meeting. We shouldn't waste time on external vendors. Right, Evan said. He smirked at me one last time. Good luck with the deliveries. Stella, try not to lose anything. He turned his back on me. The ultimate dismissal. I stood there, trembling. My hands were shaking so hard, I had to clench them into fists to stop them from spasming. The humiliation was total. It burned my skin. I turned toward the revolving doors. I needed fresh air. I needed to get away from the smell of lilies and money. I pushed through the glass doors and stumbled out onto the sidewalk. The city noise rushed back in sirens, horns, the rumble of traffic. I leaned against the stone pillar of the entrance, gasping for air. I felt tears pricking my eyes, hot and angry. I wiped them away furiously. I would not let them see me cry. I would not give them that footage. I was about to walk toward my car, to flee back to my dark apartment and my shame, when a sound cut through the chaos of the street. It was the heavy, authoritative thrum of an engine. A massive black SUV pulled up to the curb, directly in front of the main entrance. It wasn't a taxi. It wasn't an Uber. It was a vehicle that screamed power. Tinted windows, gleaming rims, government-grade tires. It idled with a low, menacing growl, demanding space. The passenger door opened. The atmosphere on the sidewalk shifted instantly. The security guard, who had ignored me inside, straightened his spine. The people walking by slowed down. I watched, frozen, as a pair of polished leather boots stepped onto the pavement. The humiliation was still burning my face. But something about the arrival of this car made the air turn electric. It felt like the pause before a thunderclap. It felt like a judgment. I didn't know it then. But the play was over. The actors had said their lines. The villain had made his speech. And now, the director had arrived to change the set. The black SUV did not just park. It docked like a battleship arriving at a port. The engine cut, and for a second, the silence on the sidewalk was heavier than the traffic noise had been. I was wiping my eyes, trying to compose myself, trying to find the keys to my car so I could flee, but the opening of the rear passenger door stopped me. It was a mechanical, decisive movement. A woman stepped out. She was wearing a charcoal wool coat, tailored so sharply it could have cut glass. Beneath it, I saw the crisp collar of a white silk shirt and a string of pearls that glowed with a luster that whispered of old, impossible wealth. Her hair, which I had only ever seen matted under a hood or blowing in the wind, was pulled back into an elegant, architectural chignon of silver and steel. I blinked, sure that my stress was causing hallucinations. It was Ruth, but it was not the Ruth of the bench. It was not the Ruth who shivered over a cup of gas station coffee. This woman stood with a posture that defied gravity. She stood like she owned the pavement beneath her feet. She stood like she owned the air we were breathing. Two men in dark suits stepped out of the front doors. They were not just security. They were the kind of security that makes police officers nervous. They had earpieces and eyes that scanned the perimeter in grid patterns. Behind them, a second car, a sedan I hadn't even noticed, unloaded 3 more people. These ones carried briefcases. They were lawyers. I knew the look. They were the executioners of the corporate world. Ruth turned her head, her gray eyes, those same piercing, analytical eyes that had dissected my life over half-eaten sandwiches, locked onto mine. She did not smile. She did not wave. She simply nodded. It was a command. Follow. She turned and walked toward the revolving doors of Blackridge. She did not wait for me. She did not wait for the security guards to open the door. She moved with a momentum that suggested doors would open simply because she was approaching them. I followed. I don't know why. Maybe because I was still in shock. Maybe because, after months of drifting, I finally had a current to swim in. We re-entered the lobby. The atmosphere inside had not changed yet. Evan and Marla were still standing near the elevators, basking in the afterglow of my humiliation. Evan was laughing at something the junior associate said. Marla was checking her phone, looking bored. The receptionist was still typing. Then Ruth walked in. It was as if someone had cut the power to the building. The shift was physical. The receptionist looked up, saw the woman in the charcoal coat, and the color drained from her face so fast she looked like she might faint. She stood up so abruptly her chair rolled back and hit the wall with a loud crack. "Ms. Halden," the receptionist stammered. Her voice was an octave higher than normal. "We were not expecting you." Ruth did not break stride. She did not acknowledge the receptionist. She walked straight toward the center of the room, her heels striking the marble floor with a rhythmic, military cadence. Click, click, click. The sound cut through the lobby chatter. People stopped walking. Conversations died in mid-sentence. The sheer gravitational pull of her presence demanded attention. Evan turned around. He looked annoyed at the interruption. He looked ready to dismiss whoever was making such a scene. His eyes landed on Ruth. I watched his face. I watched the arrogance curdle into confusion, and then, slowly, into a dawning, horrific recognition. He didn't know her personally, I could tell that, but he knew the type. He recognized the smell of power that was vastly superior to his own. He recognized a predator that could eat him without chewing. Marla froze. She was smarter than Evan. She saw the lawyers. She saw the briefcases. She saw the way the building security guards were now standing at attention, terrified. She knew this was an extinction event. Ruth stopped 10 feet away from them. Her security detail fanned out, creating a perimeter that isolated the group from the rest of the lobby. The lawyer stood behind her, silent and grim. The lobby was dead silent now. 50 people were watching. The junior associate who had been filming me lowered his phone, his hands shaking. Ruth looked at Evan. She looked at him with the same detached curiosity she had used to look at the pigeons in the parking lot. "You must be Evan Klein," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried to every corner of the room. It was the voice of a bell tolling. Evan swallowed. His Adam's apple bobbed nervously. Yes, I am Evan Klein, project manager." He tried to smile, but it looked like a rictus of pain. "Can I help you, ma'am?" Ruth did not answer him. She turned her gaze to Marla. "And Marla Voss, Chief Operating Officer." Marla straightened her jacket, trying to summon some of her usual armor. "I am, and you are interrupting a business conversation, if you have an appointment." "I do not need appointments," Ruth said. "Not in my own house." She turned slightly, extending a hand toward me. I was standing by the security desk, still clutching my delivery bag, looking like a deer caught in headlights. "Come here, Stella," Ruth said. I walked forward. My legs felt like lead. I stood next to her, acutely aware of my cheap windbreaker next to her Italian wool. Ruth looked back at Evan. Her expression hardened. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "I have spent the last 3 months conducting a field study," Ruth said. "I wanted to see what happens to the people this company discards. I wanted to see the human cost of your efficiency." She placed a hand on my shoulder. It was heavy, warm, and solid. "This woman," Ruth said, gesturing to me, "is the only person in this entire zip code who treated me with dignity when she thought I had nothing to offer her. She gave me the coat off her back. She fed me when she was starving. She sat with me in the cold." Evan laughed nervously. It was a reflex, a desperate attempt to diffuse the tension. "I don't understand. You know Stella? She is well. She is a bit unstable. We had to let her go for harassment, if she has been bothering you." "Be quiet," Ruth said. It wasn't a shout. It was a slap. Evan's mouth snapped shut. She saved my life, Ruth said. She saved me when I was just a number on a spreadsheet, when I was invisible, which is exactly how you treated her. Ruth reached into her coat pocket. She pulled out a small, cream-colored card. She held it out to Evan. "Read it," she ordered. Evan took the card. His fingers were trembling. He looked down. I saw the blood drain from his face. He went pale, then gray. He looked like he was going to vomit. He looked up at Ruth, his eyes wide with terror. "Halden," he whispered. "You are Ruth Halden." A gasp went through the lobby. The name meant something. It meant everything. "Halden Capital Trust," Ruth said, her voice ringing out. "We own 51% of Black Ridge Infrastructure. We are the majority shareholder. We are the reason you have a job. We are the reason the lights are on." Marla made a sound like a strangled cat. She knew. Everyone in the C-suite knew that Halden Capital was the dark money behind the firm, the silent giant that controlled the board. But nobody had ever seen Ruth Halden. She was a myth, a ghost. "I have been watching you, Evan," Ruth continued. "I have been watching you. Marla, I have been reading the reports you thought were buried. I have been tracking the IP addresses you thought were hidden." She stepped closer to Evan. He actually took a step back, shrinking away from her. "You called her invisible," Ruth said, pointing at me. "You told her that her family didn't want her. You mocked her for working for a living." Ruth smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. "Let me tell you something about invisibility. Mr. Klein, it is a superpower. It lets you see things that arrogant men miss. It lets you see the rot in the foundation." She turned to her lead lawyer. "I want an emergency board meeting convened in 10 minutes, she said. "Room 1, I want the entire executive team present. If they are at lunch, drag them back. If they are on the golf course, send a helicopter." "Yes, Ms. Halden," the lawyer said, already dialing his phone. Ruth turned back to the frozen group. "We are going to have a very long, very detailed conversation about procurement fraud," she said, "and about the manufacturing of evidence against a whistleblower." Marla started to speak. "Ms. Halden, please, there has been a misunderstanding. If we could just discuss this privately." "We will discuss it," Ruth said. "On the record, with a stenographer." She turned to me. The hardness in her face softened just a fraction. "Stella," she said, "you are coming with me." I started. I looked down at my delivery uniform. "I can't. Look at me. I am delivering mail." Ruth reached out and took the heavy envelope from my hand. She handed it to the nearest security guard. "Deliver this," she told him. Then she looked at me. "You are not delivering mail today. Stella, today, you are consulting for the chairwoman." She turned toward the elevator. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. No one dared to breathe. Evan and Marla stood there, statues of ruin, as the reality of their situation crashed down on them. "Come," Ruth said. I took a breath. I looked at Evan one last time. He wasn't looking at me with contempt anymore. He was looking at me with the desperate, pleading eyes of a man who knows he is drowning. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just turned my back on him. I walked toward the elevator, falling into step beside the woman who had shared my silence on a frozen bench. The doors opened. We stepped inside. As the doors closed, shutting out the lobby and the faces of the people who had destroyed me, I realized that my hands had finally stopped shaking. The elevator began to rise. We were going up, all the way to the top. The doors to the main conference room were made of frosted glass, thick enough to mute the sound of a scream. I walked through them behind Ruth, my delivery bag still slung over my shoulder, my cheap sneakers squeaking on the plush carpet. The room was already full. Ruth's team had moved with terrifying efficiency. Around the long mahogany table sat the board of directors, 8 men and 2 women who represented the old money and the new power of the infrastructure world. They looked like a collection of expensive statues, their faces masks of polite confusion that was rapidly turning into unease. Evan and Marla were ushered to 2 chairs set apart from the table. Like defendants in a tribunal, Marla was trying to maintain her composure, tapping furiously on her tablet. Evan looked like he was having trouble getting oxygen into his lungs. He kept loosening his tie, his eyes darting toward the exits. Ruth did not sit. She walked to the head of the table. She placed her hands on the polished wood and leaned forward. The room went silent. The air conditioning hummed, a low drone that sounded like a countdown. "Gentlemen, ladies," Ruth began. Her voice was calm, stripped of all the emotion she had shown in the lobby. "You may have wondered where I have been for the last 90 days. My memo stated I was on a sabbatical for health reasons. That was a lie." She paced slowly to the right. "I have been conducting a stress test," she said. "Not on our bridges, on our culture. I wanted to know what happens at the bottom of the food chain when the people at the top stop looking. I wanted to know if the values we print in our glossy annual reports actually exist on the ground floor." She stopped and pointed at the large screen on the wall. "This is what I found." The screen flickered to life. It was not a PowerPoint presentation with colorful charts. It was a raw feed of server logs, dense with code and timestamps. "This," Ruth said, "is the digital footprint of the internal investigation into Stella Green." I stared at the screen. I saw my name. I saw the dates of the emails that had destroyed my career. "You were told Ms. Green was terminated for harassment," Ruth said. "You were shown emails threatening violence against Mr. Klein and Ms. Voss. You were told she was unstable." One of the board members, a man with a white mustache, nodded. "We reviewed the file. Ruth, it seemed clear-cut. Zero tolerance policy." "Look closer," Ruth commanded. The screen zoomed in. "These emails were sent from Ms. Green's user account," Ruth explained. "However, look at the IP address of the sender." I squinted. I knew networking basics, but not enough to understand what I was seeing. "The IP address does not originate from Ms. Green's workstation," Ruth said, "nor does it come from her home network. It originates from a virtual private network tunnel that was accessed using an administrative override key." She paused for effect. "There are only 3 people in this company with that specific administrative key," Ruth said. "Myself, the Chief Information Officer, and the Chief Operating Officer." Every head in the room turned toward Marla. Marla stopped tapping on her tablet. Her face was a mask of plaster. "Ruth, this is ridiculous. My credentials are used by my assistants all the time. It could have been a hacker, a phishing attack." "We traced the keystroke dynamics," Ruth cut in. "The typing pattern, the speed, the specific errors in syntax, and we matched the timestamp of the emails to the security camera footage of the executive floor." The screen changed again. It showed a grainy video from the hallway outside Marla's office. It was dated 3 days before I was fired. In the video, Evan was sitting at Marla's desk. He was typing furiously. Marla was standing behind him, reading over his shoulder, pointing at the screen. They were building the trap together. "This is not a hack," Ruth said. "This is a fabrication, a deliberate forgery of digital evidence to frame a whistleblower." The lawyer standing behind Ruth stepped forward. He held a document in his hand. He read from it in a dry, monotone voice that made the words sound even more damning. "Under state and federal law, this constitutes criminal forgery, conspiracy to defame, and retaliation against an employee reporting safety violations. Furthermore, it exposes the company to wrongful termination suits and federal regulatory probes." The room was deadly quiet. Marla stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "I did not write those emails," she said, her voice shrill. "I delegated the handling of a difficult employee. If my subordinates took liberties, that is a management failure, not a criminal act. I cannot police every keystroke." "Name them," Ruth said softly. "Excuse me?" Marla blinked. "Name the subordinates," Ruth repeated. "If you delegated this, tell me who did you order to destroy this woman's life? Give me a name, and I will have security escort them up here right now." Marla opened her mouth, then she closed it. She looked around the room. She realized she was alone. There was no scapegoat. The video showed her standing right there. "I was protecting the project," Marla whispered. "She was going to delay the 94 launch. We would have missed the quarter." "So you admit it," Ruth said. "You prioritized the quarter over the integrity of the structure." Ruth turned her back on Marla. She looked at Evan. He was slumped in his chair, staring at his hands. "And you," Ruth said. "Mr. Klein?" Evan looked up. His eyes were wet. "I just did what I was told. I was following orders." "Were you?" Ruth asked. She signaled to the lawyer again. The lawyer placed a new document on the projector. It was an internal offer letter. It was dated 2 days after I was fired. "This is an amendment to Mr. Klein's compensation package," the lawyer read. "It grants him 5,000 stock options and a promotion to senior project director, contingent upon the successful, on-time completion of the 94 expansion." Ruth looked at me. "Do you see it, Stella? It wasn't just a breakup. It was a transaction." I felt the bile rise in my throat. I looked at the document. There it was, in black and white. My career, my reputation, my sanity all traded for 5,000 shares of stock. Evan hadn't just cheated on me, he had sold me. He had literally monetized our relationship to buy his way up the ladder. "You knew she found the bad bolts," Ruth said to Evan. "You knew she was right, but fixing it would have meant missing your deadline. It would have meant missing your bonus. So you decided it was cheaper to delete the safety officer than to replace the steel." Evan didn't speak. He couldn't. "This is not just unethical," Ruth addressed the board. "This is dangerous. If that bridge fails, people die. If people die, this company ceases to exist." She slammed her hand down on the table. The sound was like a gunshot. "I move for the immediate suspension of Marla Voss, pending a full external investigation," Ruth stated, "and I move for the immediate termination of Evan Klein for cause, with a recommendation for criminal referral to the district attorney." "Seconded," said the man with the mustache, without hesitation. "All in favor?" Ruth asked. 10 hands went up. "Security," Ruth said. The doors opened. 4 guards walked in. They did not look at Marla or Evan with respect. They looked at them like trespassers. "Take them out," Ruth said. "Escort them to their vehicles. Do not let them return to their desks. Courier their personal effects to their homes." Marla tried to maintain her dignity. She gathered her purse and walked out with her head high. But her hands were shaking. Evan was less composed. He looked at me as he passed. He opened his mouth as if to say my name, as if to ask for forgiveness, or maybe just to ask for help. I looked right through him. I looked at the wall behind him. He was already gone. He was already a ghost. When the doors closed, the room felt lighter. The air seemed to cycle, pushing out the toxicity. Ruth sat down at the head of the table. She adjusted her cuffs. She looked at the board members, who were shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Then she looked at me. "Stella," she said. I stepped forward. I felt exposed in my windbreaker under the bright lights. "Yes, Ms. Halden. Do not call me that," she said. "You know me as Ruth." She gestured to the empty chair at the opposite end of the table, the seat usually reserved for the CEO or the president. "Sit down," she said. I walked to the chair. I sat. The leather was cool and firm. I placed my hands on the table to stop them from trembling. "You have been vindicated," Ruth said. "The record will be corrected. You will be compensated. But that is the easy part. That is just money and paper." She leaned forward. Her eyes were sharp. "I did not bring you here to give you a charity handout. Stella, I do not do charity in this building. I do business." She pressed a button on the console in front of her. The screen changed again. It showed a schematic of the Interstate 94 bridge, the one with the grade 5 bolts. "We have a problem," Ruth said. "The concrete has already been poured over the substandard bolts. Tearing it down will cost $3 million and delay the opening by 4 months. Leaving it as it is invites a structural failure within 5 years." She looked at me. The entire board looked at me. You found the problem, Ruth said. Now, tell me how to fix it. If you were the director of safety, what would you do right now? You have 5 minutes. It was a test. A brutal, on-the-spot interview in front of the most powerful people in the company. She wasn't giving me the job. She was making me earn it. I looked at the schematic. My mind stopped spinning. The panic faded. This was not office politics. This was not emotional drama. This was engineering. This was physics. I knew physics. I stood up. I walked to the screen. We don't tear it down, I said. My voice was steady. That is a waste of capital, and we don't leave it. That is criminal negligence. I pointed to the support pillars. The issue is the sheer strength of the bolts under lateral vibration. I explained. Grade 5 lacks the tensile capacity for the winter contraction cycles. However, the concrete core is already set, so we bypass the bolts. I looked at the board. We install external carbon fiber reinforcement wraps on the key pillars, I said, speaking faster now as the solution formed in my head. It is a technique used in seismic retrofitting on the West Coast. We wrap the columns. It adds 20% to the tensile strength, essentially taking the load off the internal bolts. We can do it in 2 weeks. It costs $150,000, not $3 million. I turned back to the screen. Then, we install acoustic sensors on the rebar. I continued. Real-time monitoring. If a single bolt shears, the sensor picks up the frequency change and alerts central control. We turn a passive risk into a managed, monitored system. We save the schedule, we save the budget, and we increase the safety factor beyond the original design. I stopped. I turned to look at Ruth. The room was silent. The man with the mustache was leaning forward, looking at the schematic, then at me. Carbon fiber wraps, he muttered. That would actually work. It is standard in earthquake zones, I said. We just don't use it here because we think snow is our only enemy, but physics is physics. Ruth looked at me. She didn't smile, but her eyes were shining. She looked at the board members. Any objections? She asked. There were none. They were nodding. They were impressed. Not because I was a victim, but because I was right. Ruth stood up. She walked over to me. She extended her hand. Welcome back, Stella, she said. I shook her hand. It was warm. You could have sued us for millions, Ruth said quietly, so only I could hear. You could have burned this place down with the press. You had the ammunition. I don't want to burn it down, I said. I want to build it right. Ruth nodded. She squeezed my hand. That is why you are here, she said. You don't seek revenge by destroying. You seek revenge by proving you are the only one competent enough to fix the mess they made. I like that style. It is sustainable. She turned to the board. Let's get HR in here, Ruth commanded. We have a new director of safety to onboard, and get her a coffee, a real one. No more gas station sludge. I stood there, at the head of the table, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was taking up space. I felt like the load-bearing wall. The letter of apology was framed before the first paycheck even cleared. It was printed on heavy, cream-colored cardstock with the official Blackridge letterhead embossed at the top. It was signed by the interim CEO and the entire board of directors. It stated, in unambiguous legal terms, that my termination had been a violation of company policy, that the allegations against me were fabricated, and that my record was now expunged. It was not just a piece of paper, it was a holy relic. I hung it in my new office, right behind my desk, so that anyone who sat across from me had to look at it while we spoke, and people were doing a lot of sitting across from me these days. My new title was Director of Safety and Compliance. It came with a corner office on the 14th floor, a salary that was nearly double what I had made before, and a substantial grant of restricted stock units. But the most important part of the compensation package wasn't the money, it was the authority. Ruth kept her word. I reported directly to the risk committee of the board, which meant I bypassed the usual management hierarchy. If I said a site was unsafe, it shut down. If I said a project manager was cutting corners, they were audited. I was no longer the annoying woman with the clipboard who could be silenced by a mid-level executive. I was the brakes on the train. And for the first time in the history of Blackridge, the brakes actually worked. The first month was a bloodbath, but it was a necessary one. We halted the Interstate 94 project to install the carbon fiber wraps I had pitched in the boardroom. The market reacted exactly as the finance guys feared. Blackridge stock dipped by 7% when the news broke that we were delaying a major opening due to material defects. The industry blogs were on fire. Competitors sniffed around, hoping to steal our contracts. But then, something interesting happened. Ruth went on a financial news network. She sat there, calm as a glaciologist, and looked the camera in the eye. She said that Blackridge was the only infrastructure firm in the country brave enough to catch its own mistakes before they became tragedies. She spun the delay as a triumph of integrity. She said, "We do not build fast. We build forever." The stock bounced back. In fact, it went up 4% over the previous high. Clients started calling us specifically because they wanted the Halden safety standard. We had monetized honesty. It was a revelation. Meanwhile, the house cleaning continued inside the glass tower. Evan was terminated for cause. That little phrase is the most beautiful two-word poem in the corporate English language. It meant no severance, no golden parachute, no continuation of benefits. He was escorted out of the building by the same security guards who had once walked me out. I didn't watch. I didn't need to. I heard from the grapevine that he tried to argue, tried to threaten a lawsuit, but the legal team just showed him the footage of him forging emails on Marla's computer. He went silent after that. Marla Voss was placed on indefinite unpaid leave, while the SEC and an external forensic accounting firm picked through her department with fine-tooth combs. They found more than just the bad bolts. They found kickbacks from concrete suppliers, padded expense accounts, and ghost employees on the payroll. She wasn't just fired. She was facing a probable indictment. The last time I saw her, she was getting into a taxi, hiding her face with a scarf. She looked small, with the toxicity purged. I set about rebuilding the culture. My first act was to establish the Green Line. It was a 24-hour anonymous safety hotline for every employee, from the architects in the high-rise to the guys pouring cement in the mud. I made it clear if you see something, you say something, and you will be protected. At first, the line was silent. The workers were used to the old regime, where reporting a problem got you labeled a troublemaker. They didn't trust me. Then, a foreman from a site in Ohio called. He was nervous, his voice gruff. He told me that the crane cables they were using were showing signs of rust that the site manager was ignoring. I didn't send an email. I flew to Ohio. I walked onto the site in my hard hat and steel-toed boots. I inspected the cables myself. They were indeed compromised. I shut the crane down immediately. The site manager started screaming at me about the schedule. I fired him on the spot. Then I found the foreman. I shook his hand in front of his crew. I gave him an on-the-spot bonus of $500 for proactive risk management. News traveled fast. By the next week, the hotline was ringing off the hook. We caught a gas leak in Detroit. We found a foundational crack in a parking deck in Chicago. The workers realized that I wasn't there to police them. I was there to keep them alive. For the first time in my career, when I walked onto a job site, the guys didn't roll their eyes. They nodded. They respected the hat because they knew the woman wearing it didn't blink. Ruth watched all of this from a distance. She didn't hover. She didn't micromanage. We had a standing meeting every Friday morning at 8 to review the weekly metrics. One Friday, about 2 months in, I was showing her the data on the reduction in workplace accidents. The numbers were good. Injuries were down 40%. "You are doing well," Ruth said, sipping her tea. She was back in her expensive suits, looking like the titan of industry she was. But she still had that sharp, street-smart edge in her eyes. "Thank you," I said. "The team is responding well?" "I am not talking about the team," Ruth said. "I am talking about you. You carry yourself differently now. You take up space." I smiled. "I learned from the best." Ruth set her cup down. Don't get sentimental. Stella, I gave you this job because you are good at it, not because I felt sorry for you. Pity is a useless emotion. It evaporates. Competence is solid. I know, I said. I never asked for pity. Good, she said. Because the higher you go, the less you will find. There are people on this board who are still waiting for you to fail. They think this is a fluke. They think you are just a diversity hire with a sob story. Keep your armor on. I sleep in my armor, Ruth. See that you do, she said. Then she dismissed me with a wave of her hand. Go fix something. I left her office feeling recharged. It was the only kind of validation I needed. Outside of work. I began the slow process of untangling my finances. I paid off the credit card debt that had accumulated during my unemployment. I paid the back rent on the terrible apartment next to the train tracks. Even though I didn't have to, I wanted a clean ledger. I moved out of that damp, vibrating box. I didn't buy the mansion yet. That dream was still there, but I was practical. I rented a small, neat bungalow in a quiet neighborhood about 20 minutes from the office. It had a porch, a working furnace, and a refrigerator that didn't hum like a dying airplane. The first night in the new house, I sat on the floor of the living room with a pizza. I had no furniture yet, just a mattress in the bedroom and a folding chair. But it was mine. It was quiet. No train whistle, no rats, just the sound of the wind in the trees. I checked my bank account on my phone. For the first time in my life, the comma was in the right place. I had savings. I had security. I checked my messages. There were texts from old friends congratulating me on the new job. People who had ignored me when I was fired, but were suddenly very interested now that I was a director. I left them on read. There was nothing from my parents. Not a single word. They knew. I knew they knew. My promotion had been in the local business journal. Brett Shirley knew. But Gordon and Diane Green maintained a radio silence that was impressive in its discipline. They weren't calling to congratulate me because that would require admitting they were wrong about me being a failure. And they weren't calling to scold me because I was now too powerful to be scolded. So they just pretended I didn't exist. It stung, but it was a dull ache, like an old injury that flares up when it rains. I realized that their silence was actually a gift. They were staying in their lane. I finished my pizza and decided to splurge. I went online and bought a really high-end coffee maker. The kind that grinds the beans and steams the milk. It cost $800. 6 months ago, that amount would have fed me for 10 weeks. Now, it was a kitchen appliance. I pressed buy and felt a strange, giddy thrill. The next morning, I arrived at work early. I was reviewing a legal briefing regarding the fallout from the Marla investigation. The company lawyers had been working overtime to settle the lawsuits from the investors who were angry about the temporary stock dip. An email popped into my inbox. It was flagged as high importance and came from an external law firm, Sterling O'Connell, LLP. The subject line read, Settlement Distribution Notice Voss, Blackridge Class Action. I frowned. I hadn't joined a class action. I opened the email. It was a formal notification regarding a settlement fund established by Blackridge's insurance carriers to deal with the liabilities caused by the fraudulent procurement scandal. It seemed that in order to avoid a messy public trial, the insurance company was paying out damages to parties who had been directly harmed by the executive misconduct. I scrolled down to the beneficiary list. My name was at the top, Ms. Stella Green, primary claimant. The email explained that because I was the direct target of malicious defamation, wrongful termination, and professional sabotage, which resulted in documented financial and reputational loss. The independent arbitrator had awarded me a compensatory sum separate from my rehiring package. I looked at the number at the bottom of the page. I blinked. I wiped my glasses and looked again. It was a 7-figure number, $3,200,000, tax-free, as it was a settlement for personal damages and emotional distress. I sat back in my ergonomic chair. The office was quiet. The city of Milwaukee was waking up outside my window. A gray and white landscape of concrete and snow. I wasn't just stable anymore. I was rich. I picked up my phone. I looked at the contact for the real estate agent I had spoken to months ago, the one I had ghosted when I lost my job. I thought about the bungalow I had just rented. It was nice. It was safe. It was sensible. But then I thought about Evan's smirk in the lobby. I thought about my mother cutting my elbow out of the photograph. I thought about the years of being the breathing furniture. I didn't want sensible. I wanted a fortress. I opened the listing for the Lake Geneva mansion. It was still on the market. The price had dropped slightly because winter is a bad time to sell a giant, drafty estate. I looked at the photos, the high ceilings, the iron gates, the long winding driveway that put a mile of distance between the front door and the rest of the world. I hit reply on the lawyer's email. Please wire the funds to the attached account immediately. Then I called the real estate agent. It was 7:15 in the morning. She answered on the second ring, sounding sleepy. Hi, this is Stella Green, I said. I know it has been a while. Is the property on Lakeshore Drive still available? Stella, the agent said, waking up fast. Yes, it is, but the sellers are firm on the down payment requirements. They want proof of funds before a showing. I don't need a showing, I said, staring at the settlement number on my screen. I have seen it, and I don't need a mortgage. Excuse me? I am making a cash offer. I said, full asking price, but I want a 30-day close, and I want the keys on the day of signing. There was a silence on the line. Then the agent's voice came back, breathless and sharp. I will draw up the paperwork this morning. I hung up. I spun my chair around to look at the view. I had reclaimed my name. I had reclaimed my career. And now, I was going to claim my territory. The Green family had always treated me like I didn't exist. Well, they were about to find out that I took up a lot of room. The wire transfer cleared on a Tuesday morning. It was a sterile, digital event. One moment. My bank balance was a number that required me to budget for groceries. The next, it was a number that meant I could buy the grocery store. The settlement from the insurance company, combined with the surge in value of my Blackridge stock options, had placed me in a tax bracket that I used to think only existed in movies. I did not go out and buy a sports car. I did not book a flight to Paris. I did not buy jewelry. I sat in my rented bungalow, drinking coffee from my $800 machine, and I looked at the listing for the house in Lake Geneva. Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, is where the wealthy of Chicago go to escape the city. It is a place of manicured lawns, private docks, and old money. It is also the place where my family took that vacation 22 years ago, the one where I was cropped out of the photograph. Buying a house there felt like a reclamation. It felt like walking back into the frame and painting myself into the center of the canvas with permanent ink. I called the agent and told her I wanted a second viewing. The house was a Georgian revival estate set back from the road on 3 acres of wooded land. It had 6 bedrooms, 5 bathrooms, and a carriage house. It was ridiculous for one person. It was excessive. It was perfect. I walked through the house differently than a normal buyer. I did not look at the crown molding or the marble countertops in the kitchen. I did not gush over the lake view from the master suite. I walked straight to the basement. The real estate agent, a woman named Sarah who wore too much perfume, followed me, her heels clicking nervously on the stairs. The previous owners finished the basement 2 years ago, Sarah said brightly. It has a wet bar and a home theater. I ignored the wet bar. I went to the utility room. I checked the electrical panel, 200 amps, brand new breakers. I checked the sump pump. I looked for water stains on the concrete foundation walls. I checked the windows to see if they were double-paned and reinforced. The foundation is poured concrete, I noted, running my hand over the cold wall. Any history of settling, any cracks in the brick veneer upstairs? Sarah blinked. I would have to check the disclosure statement, but the inspector said it is solid. I will bring my own inspector, I said, and I want to see the perimeter fence line. Does the gate lock electronically or manually? Electronically, she said. There is a keypad and a remote. Good, I said. I will need the code changed immediately upon closing, and I want the logs of who has had access for the last 6 months. I treated the house like a fortress I was preparing to command. I wasn't looking for a home. I was looking for a stronghold. I needed to know that if I closed the door, the world stayed out. I needed to know that the walls were thick enough to hold my silence. I bought it. I paid cash. The transaction was fast and brutal. There was no mortgage contingency, no bank appraisal delay. I signed the offer on the hood of my car in the driveway, looking at the house that was about to be mine. I texted Ruth a photo of the house. I didn't send a caption. I just sent the picture. She replied 3 minutes later, "A house is just a pile of bricks." Stella, buying a house is easy. Buying a border is harder. Remember to build your boundaries before you move in the furniture. It was classic Ruth advice. Cryptic, cold, and absolutely correct. The closing took place at a title company in downtown Lake Geneva. The room smelled of stale coffee and toner. I sat across from the sellers, a nice elderly couple who were retiring to Florida. They looked at me with curiosity. They saw a 34-year-old woman, alone, buying a multi-million-dollar estate with a cashier's check. They probably wondered where my husband was. They probably wondered if I was a tech heiress or a lottery winner. I didn't explain. I just signed. Stella Green, Stella Green, Stella Green. I signed my name 30 times. With each signature, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. For my entire life, my name had been a footnote. It had been the name left off the invitation, the name forgotten in introductions. Now, it was the name on the deed. It was recorded in the county courthouse. It was carved into the legal bedrock of the state of Wisconsin. When the title agent handed me the keys, they were heavy, solid brass. "Congratulations," she said. "It is a beautiful home." "Thank you," I said. "It is not a home yet, but it will be." I didn't move in immediately. I spent the first 2 weeks fortifying the perimeter. I hired a security contractor, a firm that usually handled corporate sites, not residential homes. I had them install high-definition cameras at the gate, the front door, the back patio, and the garage. I had them install sensors on every window. I had a video intercom system wired to my phone so I could see who was at the gate from anywhere in the world. I wasn't being paranoid. I was being a safety director. I knew that safety is not an accident. It is a design choice. I also hired a lawyer, not the corporate lawyers from Blackridge, but a private estate attorney named Mr. Sterling. I had him draw up a very specific set of documents regarding the property rights and trespassing laws in Wisconsin. I wanted to know exactly what I could do if someone refused to leave my property. I wanted the statutes printed out and highlighted. Mr. Sterling was a sharp man. He didn't ask why a single woman needed a dossier on trespassing laws. He just billed me $400 an hour and gave me the binder. I was painting the dining room when the text message came. It was a Wednesday afternoon. I had taken the day off work to supervise the painters. I wanted the dining room to be a deep, navy blue, a serious color. My phone buzzed on the stepladder. I looked at the screen. It was a number I didn't have saved, but I recognized the area code. It was the area code of my childhood. "Heard you bought a big house." There was no signature. There was no, "Hi, Stella." There was no, "Congratulations," just the passive-aggressive statement of fact, implying that my business was public property. I stared at the screen. My heart did a strange double beat, a reflex of old fear. It was my mother, or maybe my father. It didn't matter. They were a single entity in my mind, the parents. They knew. Of course they knew. Brett probably stalked my social media. Or maybe a relative saw the deed transfer in the public records. I didn't reply. I didn't block the number either. Blocking them would be an emotional reaction. It would show them that they got to me. Silence was a power move. I put the phone down and picked up the paint roller. I rolled a thick coat of navy blue over the pristine white wall. I covered the blank space. "Heard you bought a big house." The message was a probe. They were testing the waters. They were waiting to see if I would bite. If I replied with anger, they would play the victim. If I replied with joy, they would ask for money. I finished painting the room. The smell of fresh paint was sharp and clean. It smelled like a new beginning. The next day, I prepared the room. I placed a long mahogany table in the center of the navy blue dining room. It was a table meant for 12 people. I placed one chair at the head of the table. My chair. I placed 2 chairs on the side. Guest chairs. I placed a voice recorder in the center of the table. It was a small digital device, black and discreet. I checked the batteries. I tested the microphone sensitivity. Then, I took a thick manila envelope. I put the documents Mr. Sterling had prepared inside. I also included a photocopy of a very old bank statement I had found in my records, a statement from when I was 16, showing a withdrawal that I never made. I sealed the envelope with red wax, pressing my thumb into the hot liquid to flatten it. I wrote 2 names on the outside of the envelope, Gordon Diane. I placed the envelope on the table next to the recorder. It was a stage set. I was writing the script for a play that hadn't started yet, but I knew the actors were on their way. They couldn't resist. The scent of money was too strong. The narrative of the ungrateful daughter who made it rich was too tempting for them to ignore. They needed to come and correct the script. They needed to put me back in the corner of the frame. Move-in day was the 1st of November. The weather was crisp and bright. The sky was a hard, enamel blue. The trees around the lake were stripped bare, their branches scratching at the sky like skeletal fingers. I stood in the foyer of my mansion. The movers had just left. The house was full of boxes. But the silence was absolute. It was a big, echoing silence. I walked to the front door. It was solid oak, heavy and reassuring. I held the brass key in my hand. It was cold against my skin. I had done it. I had survived the erasure. I had survived the framing. I had survived the poverty. I was standing in a house that cost more than my father would earn in 3 lifetimes. But I didn't feel triumphant. I felt vigilant. I looked at the security monitor mounted on the wall by the door. It showed a wide-angle view of the driveway and the iron gate at the end of it. The driveway was empty. The leaves swirled in the wind on the asphalt. I took a deep breath. I told myself that I was safe. I told myself that this was my border, my kingdom. Then, the intercom buzzed. It wasn't the polite chime of a doorbell. It was the sharp, electronic alert of the perimeter sensor. I looked at the screen. A car had pulled up to the gate. It was a beige sedan, 10 years old, practical and unassuming. It was the car I had learned to drive in. I watched as the driver's door opened. My father, Gordon Green, stepped out. He looked older, his hair thinner, but he walked with that same presumptive confidence. He walked up to the keypad. He didn't look like a visitor. He looked like an owner who had temporarily misplaced his code. The passenger door opened. My mother, Diane, stepped out. She was holding a casserole dish covered in aluminum foil, the universal prop of the Midwestern mother who wants to weaponize guilt. They stood there at my gate, staring up at the camera. They knew I was watching. My mother waved. It was a small, hesitant wave, the kind you give to a child you are about to scold. I stood in my foyer, gripping the brass key so hard it cut into my palm. My hands did not shake. My heart rate did not spike. I felt a cold, calm clarity settle over me. It was the same feeling I had when I looked at the faulty bolts on the bridge. I had identified the structural weakness. I had identified the risk. And now I was going to mitigate it. I pressed the button to open the gate. The iron wings swung inward slowly, inviting them in. "Come on in," I whispered to the empty house. "I have a seat waiting for you." I turned and walked toward the dining room, where the red wax seal on the envelope seemed to glow like a warning light in the afternoon sun. The play was about to begin. The drive from the front gate to the front door is exactly 1/4 of a mile long. I watched them cover that distance on the security monitor mounted in my kitchen. They drove slowly. I could see their heads turning, scanning the trees, the landscaping, the sheer scale of the property. They were not admiring the scenery. They were appraising the inventory. I waited until they rang the doorbell. I did not rush. I let the chime echo through the empty hallway twice before I walked to the door. I checked my reflection in the hallway mirror. I was wearing a simple black turtleneck and trousers. I looked severe. I looked like the owner. I opened the door. Gordon and Diane stood there. They had aged, but their expressions were frozen in time. They wore the same masks of performative pleasantry they used to wear at church picnics, while ignoring me in the car ride home. Diane was holding a glass casserole dish covered in aluminum foil. It was warm. I could smell the faint, nostalgic scent of tuna and cheese. It made my stomach turn. "Stella," Diane exclaimed. Her voice was pitched high, trembling with an emotion that wasn't quite joy. She stepped forward to hug me. I did not step back, but I did not open my arms. I stood like a statue. Diane hugged my rigid shoulders, then pulled back, looking a little flushed. "My goodness," she said, looking past me into the foyer. "It is magnificent, honey, just magnificent." Gordon stood behind her. He nodded at me. "You have done well for yourself, kid. We always knew you had a head for numbers." I almost laughed. They always knew. These were the people who told me I was too dull for college. "Come in," I said. My voice was flat. They walked in, their eyes darting everywhere. They looked at the chandelier. They looked at the marble floors. They looked at the winding staircase. It was a hunger I recognized. It was the look of someone who realizes they have been betting on the wrong horse and is desperately trying to change their ticket. "We brought you a casserole," Diane said, thrusting the dish at me. "Just like I used to make. We thought, well, a big house like this must feel lonely. We thought we should have a family dinner. Celebrate your success. Put it on the table," I said, gesturing toward the dining room. We walked into the room I had painted navy blue. The afternoon sun was streaming through the windows, illuminating the long mahogany table with the single envelope and the voice recorder in the center. They didn't notice the recorder yet. They were too busy looking at the view of the lake. "Incredible," Gordon muttered. He ran a hand over the back of one of the guest chairs. "You know, Stella, your mother and I were talking on the drive up. We are so proud of you, truly." "Are you?" I asked. I remained standing. "Of course," Diane said, sitting down uninvited. "We know we have had our differences, families fight, but blood is blood, and seeing you here, well, it makes us realize that we need to be closer, especially now that we are getting older." Here it comes, I thought, the pivot. "And Brett," Gordon added, sitting next to her. "He is struggling. Stella, he made some bad calls. The market turned on him. He is a good boy. He just needs a break." "He needs $100,000, I said. "Doesn't he?" Gordon blinked. "Well, I wouldn't put a number on it, but he has debts. And we will. Our retirement isn't what it used to be. We helped him as much as we could." "You gave him everything," I corrected. "You gave him my college fund. You gave him the attention. You gave him the pride." "That is in the past," Diane said, waving her hand dismissively. "We are here to talk about the future. We were thinking this place is huge. The carriage house out back looks empty. If we moved in, we could help you manage the estate, and Brett could stay in the guest wing until he gets back on his feet. It would be good for you. You shouldn't be alone." I stared at them. They didn't just want money. They wanted to move in. They wanted to colonize my success. They wanted to turn my sanctuary into the very hell I had escaped. "No," I said. The silence in the room was sudden and sharp. "Excuse me," Gordon frowned. "No," I repeated. "You are not moving in. Brett is not moving in. I am not giving you a dime." Diane's face crumbled into a practiced look of hurt. "Stella, how can you be so cruel? We are your parents. We raised you. You housed me," I said. "There is a difference." Gordon's face turned red. The mask of the proud father slipped, revealing the bully underneath. "Now you listen here. You think because you have a fancy house you can look down on us. We made you. We have rights. We have your birth certificate. We have all your childhood records. You can't just erase where you came from." "Is that a threat?" I asked softly. "It is a reminder," Gordon spat. "We know who you really are. We know your history." I walked to the head of the table. I sat down. I reached out and pressed the button on the black digital recorder. A small red light flickered on. I pointed to the camera lens concealed in the motion sensor in the corner of the ceiling. A tiny green LED blinked back at me. "Say that again," I said. Look at the camera and tell me that you own my history. Gordon looked at the camera, then at the recorder. He hesitated. What is this? Are you recording us? I am documenting a transaction, I said. I picked up the manila envelope. I broke the red wax seal. The crack of the dry wax was loud in the quiet room. You mentioned my history, I said. You mentioned you have my records. That is funny, because I have some records too. I slid the papers across the polished wood. They fanned out in front of my parents. They looked down. The top document was a credit report dated from when I was 20 years old, the year I tried to rent my first apartment, and was rejected because my credit score was under 500. Below that were copies of credit card applications, 3 of them. All opened in the name of Stella Green. All opened when I was 14 years old. I spent 5 years paying off these cards, I said, my voice steady. I ate ramen noodles and worked double shifts to pay for leather recliners and a trip to Florida that I never went on. I thought it was identity theft by a stranger. I thought I was just unlucky. Diane went pale. She reached for the water glass, her hand shaking. Then I hired a forensic accountant, I continued, and we matched the handwriting on the applications, and we matched the bank account where the payments were drawn from initially. It was your joint account, Gordon. We were in a tight spot, Gordon stammered. The arrogance was gone, replaced by fear. We intended to pay it back. It was just a bridge loan. We used your name because you were a minor. It wouldn't hurt you. It is called credit fraud, I said. It is a federal crime, and since you crossed state lines to make some of the purchases, it is also wire fraud. Diane started to cry. It was a weeping sound I knew well, the sound of her trying to become the victim. We did it for the family. We were going to lose the house. You are so selfish. Stella, you have millions now. Why do you care about a few $1,000s from 20 years ago? Because you stole my name, I said. You stole my start in life, and you came here today to steal the rest of it. You wouldn't dare, Gordon said, his eyes narrowing. You wouldn't send your own parents to jail. The press would eat you alive, the rich girl destroying her poor, elderly parents. I don't need to send you to jail, I said. I just need to send you away. I looked toward the library door, which connected to the dining room. Mr. Sterling, I called out. The door opened. Mr. Sterling, my estate attorney, stepped out. He was a tall man with silver hair and a suit that cost more than my parents' car. He held a sheaf of papers in his hand. He walked to the table and placed the papers in front of Gordon. Mr. and Mrs. Green. Mr. Sterling said. His voice was like dry ice. I represent Stella Green. These are formal trespass notices. They inform you that you are permanently barred from this property. If you return, you will be arrested. Additionally, this is a cease and desist order regarding any contact with my client. A lawyer, Diane shrieked. You had a lawyer hiding in the next room. I like to be prepared, I said. This is insane. Gordon stood up, knocking his chair over. She is our daughter. You can't trespass us. Actually, Mr. Sterling said, I can, and I have. Then, my phone, which was propped up against the flower vase, began to ring. It was a video call. I tapped the screen and turned the phone around so my parents could see it. Ruth Halden's face filled the screen. She was sitting in her office at Blackridge, the city skyline behind her. She looked like a judge delivering a verdict from on high. Hello, Gordon? Hello, Diane, Ruth said. My parents froze. They didn't know who she was, but they recognized the aura of absolute power. Who is this? Gordon demanded. My name is Ruth Halden, she said. I am the chairwoman of Halden Capital Trust. I am Stella's employer, and, as of this morning, I am the owner of the debt collection agency that just purchased the outstanding liens on your home. Gordon's mouth fell open. What? I did some digging, Ruth said pleasantly. You have a second mortgage. You are behind on payments. I bought the note. Technically, I own your living room. You can't do that, Diane whispered. I can, Ruth said, and I will foreclose. Unless you sign the agreement, Mr. Sterling has in his hand. What agreement? Gordon rasped. A full confession, Ruth said. Admitting to the credit fraud against your daughter. We won't file it with the police. We will keep it in a safe. But if you ever approach Stella again, if you ever ask her for a penny, or if you ever tell the press she is a bad daughter, I will file it, and I will take your house. This isn't family business, Ruth added, her voice dropping an octave. This is a transaction. You like transactions, don't you? Gordon looked at the phone. He looked at Mr. Sterling. He looked at the camera blinking in the corner. He looked at me. He realized, finally, that he was outgunned. He wasn't dealing with his invisible daughter anymore. He was dealing with a corporation. He picked up the pen. Mr. Sterling offered. His hand shook. He signed the paper. Diane signed it, sobbing quietly into a tissue. Get out, I said. I didn't shout it. I said it with the same calm authority I used to shut down a construction site. Gordon stood up. He looked old, defeated. He didn't look at me. He grabbed Diane's arm. They walked out of the dining room, past the navy blue walls, past the chandelier, and out the front door. They left the casserole on the table. I followed them to the door. Mr. Sterling stood behind me. Ruth was still on the screen, watching. I stood on the threshold of my mansion. The wind cut across the lake, cold and sharp. I watched my parents get into their beige sedan. I watched them drive away, down the long, winding driveway, until they were just a speck on the monitor. Then they turned onto the public road and disappeared. They are gone, Mr. Sterling said quietly. Yes, I said. Good work. Stella, Ruth said from the phone. The perimeter is secure. Thank you. Ruth, I said. I hung up the phone. I thanked Mr. Sterling and watched him leave. I was alone. I looked out at the trees. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across my land. My chest felt strange. It felt light. The heavy stone that had been sitting there for 34 years, the stone of waiting for them to love me, waiting for them to see me, was gone. I turned back inside. 2 people came here because they saw a house, I said to the empty foyer. But I bought this mansion so that for the first time in my life, I would have a place where there is no room for disrespect. I grabbed the heavy oak door. I pushed it shut. Clunk. The sound of the latch engaging was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a vault locking. It was the sound of safety. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, the air was still and warm. I walked to the dining room table. I picked up the cold casserole dish and dropped it into the trash can. Then I picked up my brass key. I placed it in the center of the table, right where the envelope had been. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the air of my own home. I finally existed. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I fought hard to find my place in the world, and I hope this story reminds you that you are worth fighting for too. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please drop your location in the comments below. Let's see how far this story has traveled. If you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe to the Maya Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help more people hear this story. Stay safe, and remember, build your own boundaries.